to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with episode 52 of the Leo Training Podcast. This week's guest is Jack Carlson. Jack is a three-time member of the United States rowing team and a World Championships bronze medalist. He has won at Henley Royal Regatta, the head of the Charles Regatta, and Royal Canadian Henley Regatta. Jack has trained under coaches Henry Bailhache-Webb and Richard Spratley at Oxford Brookes Boat Club, a high-performance center for the British team, and along with Leander Club, one of Great Britain's two most successful rowing clubs. In North American competition and United States trials, Jack is proud to represent the New York Athletic Club, the spiritual home of elite amateur sport in the United States. In this episode, Jack and I discuss Rowing Blazers, a book Jack published just over a year or so ago, and it highlights the importance and historical significance of the rowing blazer, both in the sport as well as the impact it has in terms of socioeconomic status and how it's been a long-term tradition of the sport. We also discussed Jack's experiences in college, internationally in England, and as well as in the United States national team, and how those training programs have differed and what he's learned along the way. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this brand new episode. Jack Carlson, welcome to the Leo Training Podcast. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on to the show. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you, buddy.
Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. So for those in the audience not listening, I'm a GW alumni, and Jack is a Georgetown alum. So we got to butt heads for 4 years while we raced collegiately. So before we get into the topics of interest and stuff, Jack, you were racing and competing at Georgetown University, and then after you finished up your collegiate career, you started graduate school at Oxford and then raced at Oxford Brookes. And then also you've got some really cool entrepreneurial things going on. So I'll let you share those, but why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, both from a rowing perspective and entrepreneurship perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I started rowing in high school at BB&N up in Cambridge, racing on the Charles River. I continued at Georgetown, as you say, where I was on the heavyweight team, and then really wanted to keep going after college, and decided that the best way to do that and to pursue grad school at the same time would be to go to Oxford. I was on the Oxford team my first year at Oxford. I coxed ISIS in the ISIS Goldie race, the reserve boat race, and then switched over to be part of the team at Oxford Brookes University, which is one of the high-performance training centers for Great Britain. And I had a fantastic time being part of the Oxford Brookes team. Really storied, successful program. A lot of Henley wins, kind of the powerhouse of British university rowing. Although you don't have to be a student. I was not a student at Oxford Brookes. You don't have to be a student in order to be part of their rowing team. And I would come back in the summers, most years, and try to make it onto the U.S. team. And was successful 3 times. I coxed the lightweight 8 in 2011 and 2015, and I coxed the cox pair at the World Championships in 2014. A lot of people sort of know me as the Blazer guy now that I've which was a whole adventure in itself. I first raced at Henley in 2004 with my high school, and we got knocked out in the first round. So sort of a disappointing trip from a rowing perspective, but it actually gave me a lot of time to meet people in the steward's enclosure, to observe all of these different blazers, often in pretty crazy colors, and to hear some of their stories about the traditions and rituals related to their blazers. And it really sort of sparked in my mind. I thought, do a book jackets, not because they're cool to look at, but because there are so many kind of weird stories and interesting stories about these jackets. And fast forward 6 or 7 years, and I was at Oxford. I had been on the U.S. team, and I knew people internationally in the rowing world. And I thought, you know what? I know people in New Zealand and in the Netherlands and in Britain, West, and all over the place. I should be the guy to do this book. So that kicked off sort of 4.5 years of part-time working on this book, which came out now about 1.5 years ago. So that was a sort of rowing related adventure. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that sounds like it was a massive undertaking, to do in your, quote unquote spare time around a graduate degree and continuing to Cox.
It was cool. I mean, it sort of showed me how tight knit the rowing community was, even across national borders and at all levels of the sport. Really, people were just really excited to be part of the project and really helpful. Everyone in the book is sort of a friend or a friend of a friend, I'd say, and people were really nice about helping out with the project, which was fantastic. I think it might not be the same in every other sport. If you're trying to get a major soccer star or basketball player, hey, will you just come down and have coffee and take a picture of you and tell us some stories and whatever. They might not be quite as willing, but the sport of rowing was really, was really awesome for a project like this.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the type of people that the sport of rowing attracts is very, usually humble, strong work ethic, very blue collar, and they don't mind helping one another out in the sport. So that's awesome, man. That's very cool. So what are some of the things that you learned while you were doing the research and putting this book, this project, and what eventually became a book together, and learning about kind of the history, more about the sport, and then also specifically the blazers and how that kind of ties into the tradition of the regattas and the races?
Yeah, there were all kinds of cool stories and traditions that I got to hear about. I think some of my favorite are the traditions in the Netherlands. The Dutch really go to town when it comes to traditions and a real kind of rowing culture. And they have some great sort of stories related to their blazer. I mean, at a lot of clubs, the blazers are passed down from one sort of rowing generation to the next. So when one rower retires from the sport, he will pass his blazer on to a new guy just starting his kind of competitive rowing career. And so some of these blazers are, 80, 100 years old. And it kind of goes hand in hand with this other tradition that they have, that you cannot wash the blazer unless you win the senior four at the Dutch varsity race, which is their sort of equivalent of the Oxford Cambridge boat race and Eastern sprints all rolled into one. If you do the math, there are only 4 people in the whole country who are winning that race every year, or 5, including the coxswain, I should say. And some clubs are very dominant, and some clubs haven't won in a long, long time. So some of these blazers have not been washed, or actually many of the blazers have not been washed in many, many years, and are kind of soaked with generations of sweat and beer and river water and Lord knows. So And they also might not fit the person very well if
Right.
they've handed down. I mean, you have little girl coxswains who inherit their blazers from like big heavyweight male rowers, and they're just like draped around them. The other thing they do is they fight with the blazers too. So a lot of times at some of these big, as sort of a sideshow, people will wrestle using the lapels of their blazers. So you'll grab another guy by his jacket lapels and try to wrestle him to the ground. And these are sometimes decades old blazers, so they can get shredded and sewn and put back together multiple times. So yeah, that was just a very rich kind of history and tradition related to the blazers in the Netherlands that I thought was very cool.
Yeah, I did not know that. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything like in terms of when you're doing the research, like the design or the style of the jackets from different countries that you thought was particularly interesting or jumped out in terms of the way that they might have it cut for the athletes?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny actually. A lot of people don't realize the garment of a blazer and also the word blazer comes from the sport of rowing. Nowadays, pretty much everyone in the world has some form of blazer in their closet. Usually just like a normal navy blue blazer with
Right.
metal buttons or whatever. But I mean, guys, girls, no matter what job you have or whatever, pretty much everyone has a blazer. And it actually all comes from the sport of rowing. And the original blazers were designed to be worn as you're walking down to practice and even worn in the boat while you're training. So the original blazer was almost like kind of like a hoodie of its day. It'd be unlined, but it'd be made from, pretty sturdy, heavyweight wool. So it could keep you warm, but you wouldn't be too hot when you start rowing. It'd usually be a 3-button jacket, so you could button it up more to stay warm. It'd be pretty relaxed in terms of how it's fitting, a soft shoulder, because you have to be mobile enough to row while you're doing it. And even the colors and the contrast trim and all those details serve kind of a practical purpose at first.
Mm-hmm.
People would wear them in the boat, and the fact that they were these bright colors or stripes, whatever, would help spectators on the shore tell which boat was which. I'm sure any of your listeners who've ever watched a rowing race from know it's not always easy to tell who is who. So yeah, a lot of those details about how they're cut and about lined and being 3-button, even being brightly colored, they were originally meant to serve kind of a practical purpose, and they were the original blazers, and they were the first real kind of sporting uniforms in any sport. So yeah, a lot of kind of cool history there.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's. I think we can kind of appreciate it more because we've been in the sport so long. But it's also interesting to think how far back rowing goes, and that it predates a lot of or most intercollegiate sports. Or even really the NCAA. So it's well before all these governing bodies or organizations were established. You have this sport that was around for a long time.
Oh yeah, and so many schools get their colors from the rowing team. Harvard Crimson. That's their color because Harvard was entering a race on the Charles River, and had a lot of crews entered. They wanted their fans, their classmates, and their girlfriends to know which boat was theirs. And one of the guys ran out to the store and he said, "What are the most brightly colored handkerchiefs that you have?" And he said, "Well, we have these red ones." And he took them and they wore them around their neck in the race. Yale blue. It comes from the rowing team. Their school color was green until the rowing team wanted it to be blue. Georgetown, which is my alma mater, comes from the rowing team. They had half Northerners and half Southerners in their boat shortly after the Civil War, and they said we should make these the color of the team, the team colors, and it was later adopted by the school as a whole. So,
wow,
it's a sport that's had a profound effect on institutions and on intercollegiate sport in general.
I love it. That's so cool. I did not know any of that, so I think that's absolutely fascinating, and it's really really cool to see that trickle down effect across all the sports at a university or college.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, man. Very cool. So what's one of the that's a massive project you undertook over that 4-year period. So what's one of the things, like, as you're doing that, researching and writing and putting it all together, that you look back and was kind of really change your perspective on rowing that you may not have known before?
I think it definitely gave me a deeper appreciation of the history of the sport. But I think another important kind of aspect of the project, and something that I appreciated more and more as I was doing it, was how expansive the sport is. I think sometimes people think of the sport and they can stereotype it a little bit as being, kind of the domain of Ivy League colleges or of, prep schools and boarding schools. And, to some extent that's certainly true. But on the other hand, it really is a wide ranging sport. And even back a long, long time ago, yes, the sport started at Oxford and Cambridge, but you have a whole world of more sort of quote unquote blue collar, oarsmen participating in the sport. I think today the sport is growing more than ever. I'm involved in something here in New York called Row New York, that is helping kids from disadvantaged communities access the sport, and it's not something necessarily totally new or revolutionary. It's a great thing, but the sport itself is, I think, a lot more wide-ranging and all-encompassing than people necessarily realize just from the outside. So hopefully that can be something that more and more people will work towards, and hopefully those stereotypes will start to kind of fade away a little bit. Not that we should lose touch with any of those parts of the sport's history, but hopefully people realize that it's a lot more than just that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Before I ask you the next question, is there anything else that you want to touch on regarding Rowing Blazers, the book, or the work, the project, when you were researching it?
I could talk about Blazers all day, but I'm happy to talk about other things too, for sure.
Well, no, I just wanted to segue, since you brought up the Row New York. I mean, that's not something we had down as a topic, but that's definitely particularly interesting. So I was just curious how you got involved in that project, and what's your role, and what's some of the things that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty new as far as being involved in a more hands-on way, but when we were doing the book launch here in New York, something that I really wanted to do was have a portion of the proceeds, at our launch event, to go to a good cause, and we did the same thing in the UK. So our book launch in London, part of the proceeds went to the Stewards Charitable Trust, which is run by the Henley Stewards, and which helps young people to access the sport. And for our launch here in New York, I met up with the folks from Row New York, learned a lot more about their program, and thought that would be a really great fit. I mean, it's really, really well organized, really well run, and it's a very competitive program, actually. I think, at first, if you just hear about it, you might think, oh, that's great. It gives kids a chance to kind of get out in the boat and see what the sport's all about. But it's actually a lot more than that. And the team is very competitive, racing at the head of the Charles, New York State Championships, and even went to Canadian Henley for the first time this year. So it's a pretty serious program that's doing a lot of great things. There's a similar program in Philadelphia, actually, PCR, which we did a book event in Philly, actually, and partnered with them on that. But I think, these programs are really great that it's not just kind of paying lip service. It's actually creating very competitive teams, and a lot of the kids who are involved in the program go on to row, at some pretty high level colleges. So that's a cool thing to be part of.
That's awesome. So they get a nice introduction to the sport and try it out, learn a lot, and have a good, extracurricular activity they're doing while they're getting their feet wet in the sport.
Yeah, and end up getting pretty serious about it in many cases too. So yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So kind of jumping around a little bit more, but so let's talk about, competing collegiately at Georgetown University, and then you want to continue, with rowing. Like you said, and you figured the best way to do that was at Oxford, and pursuing a graduate degree. So first question I have for you is, what's that experience like going from a U.S. collegiate environment to the British one or UK one? How's it differ? What are similarities? How's the training different? All those things.
Yeah, it's funny. It's really such a different world in the UK. I think in the most recent rowing issue of Rowing Magazine, actually, Henry Hofstadt, who is a fellow Georgetown grad, and he and I have raced at Henley together and raced we're in the Cox pair together. He talks about this a little bit as well, how different the sport is in Britain. I went to Georgetown, where there is a pretty rich history of the sport of rowing, and but you're not like on the same level as the basketball players. Everybody knows their name,
right?
Who they are. If you see one of the Georgetown basketball team walking around campus, you instantly know who that is. They're like the celebrities, on campus. And you go to Oxford, and it's like suddenly that's you. That's the rowing team. That's who everybody is, pointing at, and everybody knows your name, and no one knows the names of the Oxford basketball players. Totally on the other foot, and you have something like the boat race, where hundreds of thousands of people are lining the banks of the Thames to watch it, which, there's nothing like that in the U.S. I guess the closest I've experienced is racing at the Windermere Cup opening day in Seattle. But, that's a sort of local event that has a huge turnout. It's a fantastic event, but it's not even then on the same level as something like the boat race or Henley Royal Regatta, where it's a national event. It's one of their big national sporting events. And both those events, the boat race and Henley Royal Regatta, are televised now. So you have millions of people tuning in to watch it on TV. It's really incredible, sort of coming from the U.S. to see where the sport is in the kind of national consciousness of Great Britain. And you see it even reflected at the national team level as well. It's not uncommon for people in Britain who have no real connection to the sport or experience in it to know who their big dogs are on the national team, and to know how the British rowing team is doing. And I think it's not something we really have in this country, that sort of consciousness. People know Michael Phelps. People know, the track athletes a little bit more. That's what the sport of rowing is like in Britain. Our sort of awareness of Lochte and Phelps and those guys. That's how people know Pete Reed and Alex Gregory and Andy Triggs-Hodge in the UK. So Yeah, it is a really big difference. It is a really, really big difference. And it was really cool to be a part of for a long time. And hopefully, we can kind of get the sport um, uh, close to that level in terms of people's consciousness in this country.
Yeah, that's incredible the way you describe it. That experience of the boat race, all the people lined up along the shore, and having it be a televised event. It brings to mind some of the passages in The Boys in the Boat, and how the old national championship 4 mile race that was hosted in Poughkeepsie, New York, that Daniel James Brown describes in that book. I mean, that's the only thing maybe in the U.S. that kind of comes to mind that could be a parallel at one point that we had here in this country.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. So that's kind of from a society and cultural, perspective and everything. So training wise, what's it like? Is it more of an emphasis like on, volume or intensity, variances in technique? Are things more emphasized or not emphasized in the rowing stroke?
Yeah, it's funny. I think the sport in Britain, just very generally speaking in very broad, I think there is a lot more technical approach to the sport in Great Britain in general. Um, I think that generally British coaches are more surgical, more specific with defining the technique that they want their athletes to row. This, of course, is a very sweeping kind of generalization, but it is one of my observations. But there are a lot of variations amongst different clubs in Britain. I think there is definitely more of an emphasis on volume as well in terms of training. When I first got to Oxford, it was very, very different in terms of what our training schedule and training program was from what I had experienced at the collegiate level in the U.S. I think part of that stems from the NCAA restrictions on the number of hours you can spend training, and
Sure.
times of year those limits are are even lower. But yeah, at Oxford it was very much low intensity was the name of the game, and generally at Oxford you spend every morning doing anywhere from 50 minutes at the low end to even up to 90 minutes at the high end of low intensity steady state work on the ergs. And then in the afternoon you'll be on the water, and you'll usually be doing another high volume, low intensity training session. Sometimes that involves more technical training. Sometimes that's really just get on with it and just put the meters in. When I went over to Oxford Brookes, it was a little bit different, and for sure there's still a lot of high volume. I found Oxford Brookes to be a lot more of a kind of competitive environment. Every training session there's some competitive element to it, which is very different from the training program at OUBC. And it's funny, actually, at Oxford Brookes, you're only on the water on Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday for much of the year, for most of the winter. In the UK, at least in southern England, the bodies of water where you're training don't freeze like they do in most of the Northeast in the US. So there's not really any erg season, but I just found it really interesting that was how Brookes ran the program. And obviously they have a lot of success with it. Coming from the US, you're like, this is so weird. This is so crazy, but they're basically, they're on the ergs and they're lifting Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. Friday is the day off. And then you're on the water Wednesday, and then for double sessions Saturday, double sessions Sunday. So it's just kind of like a different training schedule, totally different approach to training than anything that we would see in the US. And, if you just hear it described like that, you might not be sure how it's really going to work out. But it obviously is working very well for them. And, I think it's just interesting. It was really interesting coming from the US to see there are completely different ways of thinking about the sport and thinking about training. I think in the US, it's very much about the high intensity intervals. Again, I think part of that is a product of the time limitations that the NCAA imposes for how many hours a day or a week you can train. And that's definitely not necessarily the order of the day in most clubs in Britain.
Yeah, that's a key point there, especially with having to fall under the the guidelines of the NCAA and meeting the hourly requirements. So for those that aren't example or aren't aware, in the fall you have like your 8-hour weeks, and then once you move into in season, you're hitting 20 hours, and then it fluctuates. Again to the 8-hour week, and then again the 20-hour week. So you have that coaches have to manage what they can prescribe in terms of training sessions on and off the water during those time periods to meet the standards set forth, for the athletic department in the NCAA. Yeah, so that's definitely different. So I'm guessing that the amount of volume they didn't have a cap necessarily, did they?
No, there's no cap. There's no, there's no limitation like we have in the NCAA. But I think it's also interesting to see how those different sort of training regimes at the college level, that I was part of at Georgetown and in the U.S., and then I got to witness and be part of at both Oxford and Oxford Brookes in the UK. It's interesting how they sort of reflect their way upwards onto the national team level. So, I have a lot of friends on the British team, and, certainly their training is very volume oriented. It's a lot of steady state, a lot of, UT2, UT3, and certainly there's a very technical element of that as well. You just look at the British boats and you can tell that there's a sort of singular way of rowing. And whether you agree with it or disagree with it, they're all on exactly the same page with what their technical goal for the stroke is, And having been at the U.S. Training Center for the past year, I think maybe it's a product of the collegiate system, sort of, making its way onto the national team level. But, I don't think there was anywhere near the same kind of focus on volume that certainly I know many of my friends on the British team or on the New Zealand team, are doing, just in terms of how many meters we're doing. And I don't think there's anything close to that same kind of technical sort of goal setting, that laser focus on this is how we have to row. And you look at the British athletes, and I know just from my friends on the team, there is a very sort of there's a sense of orthodoxy about this is the British team, this is how we row. In the U.S., I remember actually my first day at the training center a little over a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. Luke and Volpe sat everyone down and they said, we're not going to give you a specific way that we want you to row. We're not going to give you, we're not going to show you a video and say, this is the technique we want you to row. We're not going to describe for you the stroke that we want you to row. Just everybody rows how they want to row, and we'll just kind of see how it goes, and we'll see who's making boats move the fastest. at first when I said that, I thought they were joking, actually. I was kind of waiting. I was waiting for them to be like, no, we're just screwing with y'all. This is the video. This is exactly how you guys got to row. I was like waiting for that moment, and then it didn't come, and they were like, okay, the meeting's over, and everyone left, and they were serious. So it's very, very different, not just from kind of training program wise, but in terms of how technique is taught or not taught. There are huge, huge differences, I'd say, between Britain. I think a lot of places, New Zealand is kind of similar, and the U.S.
Yeah, that's very interesting that how you describe the sort of very well defined, concise concept of how the stroke's going to be executed. And that's definitely like a system approach. It seems like it's coming from the sort of the top down, from the British team all the way down through the corresponding schools that feed up into the national team on Britain's side of things. And that's, from an athlete standpoint, that's huge, because it takes such a long time to groove in and make changes. That seem on the surface to people that don't know the sport, it seem very small or minute, but when you're doing something at 18 strokes a minute versus 38, it's and at a very, very high intensity and power output, it's a big difference.
Yeah.
Very cool. That's very interesting stuff, especially from your experiences on the in all those different systems, collegiate, international, and then back on the U.S. team. So kind of shifting gears, I guess, again, what are some of the things that you've kind of taken from your experience as a coxswain and being in all these different environments, culturally, as well as the different training systems? So if you step behind the megaphone, what are some of the things that you would kind of implement with some of the athletes if you're coaching?
That's that's a very big question.
Not to put you on the spot or anything, Jack.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, coxing at all these different places. One thing you pick up is just the linguistic differences. I find myself, getting in boats in the U.S. and, saying easy when in America we say way enough, and vice versa. Port, starboard in Britain, no one knows what that means. It's stroke side, bow side.
Okay.
So that's been, just a linguistic learning process. But I guess, it's kind of like, from the point of view of training and coaching and technique, certainly I would say my experiences in Britain really had a big effect on me and what I believe sort of makes boats go fast. I think certainly from a technical perspective, the Brits are doing it right. You look at their boats at all levels, really. And I'm not saying any one specific technique, but I'm saying just the idea of having a singular technique. This is how we row. You're part of this team. This is how this team rows. This is how you got to row. It shouldn't seem like rocket science. That's one of the defining aspects of the sport, is that it's the ultimate team sport, quote unquote. Everybody has to be doing the same thing, but it's something I think that is generally lacking in this country. And I've witnessed it at the national team level. And I think you can see it at all levels of the sport. And, in Britain, it's exactly the opposite. I think you look at the British team, those guys all row exactly the same way. It's not something you can say, to be honest, for better or for worse. If you look at the USA, it's not something you can say. And I don't necessarily always agree. And as an athlete, you're not always necessarily going to agree with what is the technique that's being taught. But it's up to you. It's part of the sport that you have to get on the same page as the other athletes in your boat or the other athletes in the club. I mean, at OUBC, Sean Bowden, who's the Oxford coach, teaches a very idiosyncratic technique. You know, it involves breaking the arms relatively early, opening the body relatively early. It wasn't stuff I necessarily agreed with, and it's not stuff that the athletes who are going there are necessarily going to have in mind as the fastest way to move a boat. But what you can say is that they all do the same thing. When it comes to the boat race, they're all rowing exactly the same way. And even if it's not the best way in the world to be rowing, the fact that they're all doing the same thing is pretty darn effective. And, so I think that is one of the most salient points that I would kind of bring home from my experience in Britain. I think the high volume training, if you have the time to do it, I think you will reap the rewards. But at the same time, I think those rewards may be pretty marginal. I mean, at the college level, just looking at Oxford versus Oxford Brookes, or looking at Oxford and Cambridge, where they are doing very high volume, and generally low intensity based. It's a training program based around that kind of training versus some of the top college programs here in the U.S., where they're probably doing a lot more high intensity interval training. The differences are probably pretty marginal, I would say. These are my observations and my insights from just the particular teams that I've been a part of. But those are kind of my takeaways from my experience there. Certainly at the national team level, the elite level, where it's your job basically is training, you're going to reap the rewards from the volume. But the erg scores and the boat speed that, say, Harvard, Yale, Cal, Washington, that they're producing on the NCAA, restrictions. And I'm sure, all those athletes are doing extra work as well. But, those crews versus, say, Oxford or Cambridge, where there are no caps to how much they can train every day, the differences are marginal, and often many of those U.S. crews are probably going to be faster. So I guess read into that what you will in terms of, what the most effective way to train is. I think
it's very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. One question I have for you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you going to say something else? No, you good?
Yeah, all good, man.
Okay. Did you notice a difference in terms of the number of injuries that may be going on now? Obviously, you're going to have those in any sport, but in terms of the training program, more of a higher volume, lower intensity versus a higher intensity, did you, just from an observational standpoint, I'm not asking if you were, counting specific numbers or anything, but is that something that, if you think about it, came to mind, there was less injuries or more injuries in a particular training program?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, just from my observation, just sort of anecdotally, I guess, I was shocked for a ribbon injury that the Oxford team was sustaining every year. Now, this is going back a few years, so I don't know if their program has been adjusted to kind of rectify this, but it was amazing, in sort of like a year and a half of being on the team, and an additional 4.5 years or so of being close to people on the team. The number of ribbons that guys were taking on, that they had to miss sometimes significant amounts of training, was really astonishing to me. And I can't speak, what was exactly causing it. But to me, it was really mind-boggling and stood out in my mind as like, okay, these guys should be trying to do something to prevent this from happening a little more actively. It's not, whatever the benefits of this training program are, it seems not worth it to have some of your star athletes, having to miss several weeks at a time of training. And, Oxford is an environment where you're going to have 2 or 3 really star athletes who are going to make the difference. It's not like you just have, many, many more guys waiting in reserve. When I was, it was the same year that the Winklevoss twins were in the Blue Boat. We also had Simon Gavlik, a German guy from Harvard, who was one of our key players, but I remember missed weeks and weeks because of a rib injury, and he was one of 5, 6, 7 guys on a team that's basically 2 boats, 2 eights, to have to miss several weeks because of rib injuries. So, yeah, I mean, that was the thing that stood out the most to me in terms of looking at injuries in these 2 systems.
Yeah, that's. I don't know the answer yet to that. That's something I'm working on. I had Dr. Jane Thornton on earlier on a different episode of the podcast, and we spent the entire, 75 to 90 minutes on that injury,
Wow.
on that subject matter alone, and it really boiled down to there's 3 theories around why it's happening, but there's no sort of, they haven't come to a conclusion on exactly why yet. I have my kind of own ideas as to what precipitates it. That's one that is kind of always interesting to me, because that's the one I had to deal with the most was rib injuries or intercostal injuries. But because the nature of the sport is in a seated position, there's a rotational component in there. Even you don't necessarily think about it with sculling, but there is a little bit. You need that ability to have good thoracic extension and rotation, and making sure that the shoulder blade, the scapula, is really sticking down to the rib cage. It's a bone that actually doesn't adhere to anything. So to get that stability, it needs to kind of quote unquote glue down to the rib cage. And when that doesn't happen, that's when you start having guys trying to, they might be hiking the shoulder up towards the ear, trying to create that stability. They get, instead of keeping their shoulders down and away from their ears. And it could also just be, multiple variables, one of which could be an instance of the high volume program, and you just fatigue builds up, and you're changing your biomechanics, the way you're rowing and how you're applying pressure during the drive and loading your body. So
yeah, it was on a level at Oxford that I've not anywhere else, be it on the national team, with Oxford Brookes, or at the collegiate level, or when I was coaching, it's not anywhere near the level that I witnessed at Oxford. And yeah, as you say, I mean, it's a program that's oriented around, or at the time anyway, was oriented around very high volume on static ergs, and that had a pretty idiosyncratic way of rowing, opening the body, breaking the arms pretty early, with not much layback at all. So I don't know what of those factors or some other factor that's not occurring to me was causing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the erg's definitely a big one. I mean, the research has been out. They actually just updated a injury update with 3 of the key authors are Dr. Fiona Wilson, Dr. Jane Thornton, Dr. Anders Vinther, and they're doing a lot of research around the rib and low back. And they found kind of a breaking point in some of the research is like when you're doing pieces, not total volume for a session, but pieces that are greater than 30 minutes on the ergometer, that's when they started seeing sort of a spike in the number of injuries. So even if you're doing, a high volume session of 90 minutes, it's like better to do, 3 by 25 and a 15-minute piece, and making sure you're moving around in between. And the other thing is the erg, it places different demands on the body. So you need much greater ability to get flexion through the trunk, through the upper body, whereas in the boat, you need much greater like hip, knee, and ankle dorsiflexion. You need to have the ability to move much more through the lower body to get the compression. But it's the complete inverse on the ergometer. So, on the surface, the movements look similar, but the demands in the body you're loading the body completely differently. And then you have to factor in, like we talked about, volume, intensity, and then that transference of going from two completely different environments, the boat and then the erg, and what that's doing to the quote unquote, the athlete's body and the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, that's interesting stuff, man. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay. So shifting gears again, anything else you want to touch on? It comes to mind you want to share regarding training experiences, looking back over any of the places that you've been or environments?
That could be a whole book in itself as well. See what you got on the docket next for me.
All right. Very good. Okay. So what's next? You got anything up your sleeve next in terms of, entrepreneurship or rowing for Jack Carlson?
I guess from a rowing perspective, I'm taking a little bit of time now to kind of assess what's next. Frankly, I'll just speak openly here on your podcast. I was very disappointed to see the contract renewal for the U.S. men's heavyweight rowing. I thought it was very unusual that the contract renewal took place before the Olympic Games had even started. I think that, that sort of implies something somewhat shady regardless, because almost every country in almost any sport, they wouldn't renew the coaches' contracts right before the Olympic Games. It's highly unusual, especially off the back of pretty disappointing results at the 2015 World Championships with none of the training center boats medaling. And I think, the concern that many people actually expressed about the wisdom of that decision by Curtis Jordan and Glenn Murray to renew those coaching contracts before the Olympics was kind of justified after seeing the pretty disappointing performance at the Olympic Games as well. So, my future in the sport at the kind of senior international level is kind of to be determined, after that disappointment. And I think a lot of the guys who were at the training center, whether they made the team or not, whether they would speak about it openly or not, share those same feelings. And, I think there are 9 athletes right now who are at the training center, heavyweight men's athletes at the training center right now. And none from the 4 or from the 8 from the Olympics. And many of the athletes who perhaps could have or should have been in those boats, who I know could be making the team go faster now, aren't at the training center now, precisely because of those same concerns. So that's very up in the air. On sort of other fronts, I am working on a project right now related to my book, to Rowing Blazers. I'm also working on a couple of other books that range anywhere from, I'm working on a book about ties, of all things, I guess. a follow on to rowing blazers.
That's perfect, man.
I'm working on turning my PhD thesis into a book that'll be a little bit drier reading material. And yeah, just trying to live life as a kind of non-rowing member of society. And although I love the sport, I really do love the sport, and I want to stay involved with it one way or another for a long time to come. One of my buddies just called me up 2 days ago actually and said, "Hey man, do you want to race ahead of the Housatonic? We're throwing together this 4." And I think I had never raced the Housatonic before, and I had no idea really what to expect or what the boat was going to be like. But I'm the kind of person who's just like, yeah, why the hell not? Let's do it. So I actually got into a boat yesterday as the first time since racing at Henley many months ago, and it was as fun as ever.
Good. That's good, man. Nice. It sounds like you got a lot of fun stuff going on in terms of the projects and everything, and nothing wrong with taking a little downtime to figure out the next step.
Yep, exactly.
Good. All right. Anything else that you want to touch on, rowing, entrepreneurship, blazer related, before we move into the rapid fire questions?
Oh, I didn't know there was a rapid fire round.
Oh yeah, man. Of course.
All right, let's go. Hit me.
All right, here we go. So, given your current knowledge and your experiences at this point in your life, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Wow, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, I was a freshman at Georgetown. I guess I would give myself the advice of, have fun with it. Don't take it so super seriously. I think I got to college very much focused on having success, very focused on rowing on some level to the detriment of other parts of my life. And, yes, you want to be successful. I always have gone into every team, every race wanting to win. But, I guess I would tell myself to just chill out just a little bit and, maybe let some of the success come to you.
Nice, man. Yeah. I can definitely echo those sentiments for myself too, for sure. A little too much intensity in the younger days, not enjoying the present moment.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. What's your favorite strength training exercise?
Wow, man, you're talking to a coxswain
That's all right.
Who has avoided all forms of strength training in an effort to keep body mass to a minimum for years and years. But actually, it's funny. This past year when we were based in Chula Vista, I would just do upper body free weights in my room at night. I didn't necessarily even want anyone to know I was getting any lifting in because I was already a little bit above weight, but it's not something I have the most experience in.
That's all right. That's okay, man. Yeah, no worries. I mean, it could be anything as simple as a push-up or anything. These are good, fun questions. So what are you doing? Dumbbell presses in the in your room?
Yeah. I was doing curls, hammer curls, overhead press. I would do I would do push-ups and I would do a plank. Love the plank.
That's right. All right. Awesome. Okay. So the next question you can think about kind of, I guess, your overall experiences. So how has your training changed today compared to 10 years ago? So this might be, because you're a coxswain, you're in the environment, you're not necessarily doing all the, the sessions on the erg and the boat and stuff, but you can kind of take that one and answer any way you want.
Yeah. Well, I've done a decent amount of coaching as well. So, it definitely kind of enters my mind from that perspective. I coached at Oriel College, Oxford, for a couple years when I was over there, and then I coached St. Mark's boarding school up in Massachusetts like a year and a half ago for their season. And yeah, I think, it's definitely developed. I think I would have been putting a lot more of a premium on the interval workouts with less thoughtful approach to kind of super compensation and the sort of rhythm of training and how many of those types of workouts should be in a program, per week or per month, etc. And I think my time in England has certainly made me appreciate the value of high volume training. But when you're training with people who have academic demands or, are in high school and are trying to do a million other extracurriculars, the reality of the situation has to be taken into account as well. So, I guess it's given me a greater sense of balance of, incorporating higher volume training certain parts of the season, and then bringing in those high intensity interval workouts, but with a lot less frequency than I would have deemed valuable, 10 years ago or so.
Awesome. Have you ever had an injury? And then if you have, how did that injury affect your training?
Yeah, again, as a coxswain, I'm not sure how relevant this is, but I will say that this is kind of a unique coxswain one. I've lost my voice many times coxing, and especially when I was at Oxford Brookes, and everything we're doing is really competitive, day in, day out, and it's time when I was coaching the megaphone boxing, and I would lose my voice, several times in the season. And, I actually went and saw someone in Boston who traditionally works with musicians about how to use my voice better. And that was really interesting, without going into too many of the things that I learned there. Like, your posture can really affect how you're using your vocal cords, and hydration, which I always thought was like a really short-term thing. Like if you have a sore throat, drink a little bit of water, but it makes a huge difference. Just like being hydrated before you're going to go out and yell a lot makes a big difference. So yeah, that's very much like coxswain oriented answer to the question.
Hey, that's great though, man. I'm sure there's some coxswains that listen to the show in the audience, so that's valuable information from your experiences for sure. Very cool. All right, what's one thing that high school athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
I don't know if this is necessarily the right sort of answer that you're looking for, but I think as a piece of advice I would give high school athletes is to think a lot more about where they want to go to school more than where they want to row in college. So it's not necessarily something that I would say, like, it's not like a piece of training advice for high school athletes, but I think sometimes high school kids, and I saw it when I was when I was coaching, they get really sucked into the idea of, really wanting to row in college, and, might get really enticed by the first coach that calls them or comes their way, or, might just be thinking about where do they want to row. And, my advice is just, you got to think about where you want to go to school, because that's first and foremost what you're going to be doing. The rowing is going to be part of it. It's going to be a cool part of it, but it's not necessarily what you're going to that institution for. And, I was in a fortunate position to have a lot of different schools to pick from. And excuse me, it's from coxswain yesterday. And, Georgetown was not the best rowing team out of all the schools I was looking at, but overall, it was the best fit for me. And yeah, I guess that's my advice to high school athletes.
No, I think that's priceless, man. That's a really good piece of advice there, because they got to take the long-term view at it. Like there's a small percentage of rowers that are going to have the potential or ability to row after college on an international team or national team. And you need to take into strong consideration what you're going to be doing afterwards for your work and your career. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. What's your best tip to improve recovery after a training session?
My best tip to improve recovery. I think one big thing, this is another kind of takeaway from England, is to make sure that it's sort of active recovery. I just think back, to my experience at Georgetown, and when we would have a day off, I think a lot of guys would spend that day, lying in bed and doing work and whatever. And I think one thing that was really stressed at every team I was a part of in Britain is that, if your off day, you can't just be totally, stationary. You can't just be feeling sorry for yourself, lying in bed, and
Right.
It's some form of active recovery.
No, that's huge. Moving around on the day off, like you don't necessarily need to go and do 60 minutes, but going for a jog or doing foam rolling or some type of dynamic warm up, cool down, like just getting your body to move through different ranges of motion really, really helps when you get back to that next training day.
Exactly. That was something that was stressed a lot at Oxford and at Oxford Brookes, and I think is a really good takeaway.
Awesome. All right, three more to go. These are all fun right here. All right, so if you got to pick one, all right, like what's your favorite meal?
Oh man, I don't know if this is a good a good kind of meal, but I love margarita pizza. Really authentic Neapolitan margarita pizza.
Nice. What do you mean? That's like perfect. That's like carbs. There's cheese. There's some protein in there. That's
Protein
good.
Flour. That's actually what makes it really authentic. 00 high protein flour.
Nice. I love it. All right. What's one book everyone should read besides Rowing Blazers?
Oh man, come on. Oh man, one book everyone should read. There's a really cool book. I don't know how relevant this is for training or anything. It's called Daily Rituals, and it's mainly looking at kind of creative people, artists, writers, and it just describes their day, what they do every day, how many hours they're sleeping, when they get up, what they do right when they get up, and it's wide ranging, but it offers a lot of inspiration. And whether you're training or you're working or whatever you're doing, I think it provides some good inspiration for how to kind of structure your day and your life.
Awesome. I love it. I got a final question here. So this kind of builds off your answer. So who do you study or have you studied in your career to get better? And that doesn't even necessarily have to be rowing related. It could be, self-improvement or entrepreneurship related. Like who are people that you read their books or you follow their work online or read their blog, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I will give a kind of rowing related answer, I guess.
Sure.
I think Mike Spratley is a guy who I've watched all his YouTube videos, and I keep coming back to them. I find myself coming back to them. He has a whole series of DVDs, and they can be sometimes maybe on the surface seem a little bit cheesy or whatever, but he's a guy who, I find myself coming back to again and again when I'm coaching, when I'm coxing. A lot of his philosophies about the sport and psychological aspects that he taps into, I'll never forget. I mean, nothing stops us, whether it's a rainy day or, no matter how cold it is, just getting that mentality that nothing stops us, I think, I thought was really, really cool. It's something that I try to share with my athletes. Even some of his technical points, while you may agree, disagree, whatever, just the way he talks about the stroke and talks about the sport, I just find really, really compelling. So yeah, this is more rowing related, but I think he's someone really good for any athlete, any coach at any part of their career. I think he's worth studying for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, that's absolutely a guy that has had a tremendous amount of success. Very cool. Awesome. Jack, this has been a pleasure. So just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye, but we'll wrap this one up.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to listen to this episode of the Leo Training Podcast. If you enjoyed the content, I greatly appreciate it if you take a moment of your time, head on over to iTunes and drop in a 5-star review. Or head on over to your favorite social media network, such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram, and reshare this content so that others can enjoy it. And be sure to tune in next week when I have on Dr. Kenneth J., and we discuss his book, The Cardio Code, and the effects and importance of cardiovascular exercise for human health and the health of the heart.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.